Okay, we have gone through the prep, we've gone through our meeting, and there's one last thing for us to do, and that's to follow up, to make some meaning out of the meeting. And what we're going to do is complete the actual individualized support plan document after we're done. Now, in your handout package, I gave you a sample document and a form, and I'll see if I can find a digital version that you can fill in on your own, but you may have to make one up on your own computer. So I'm going to demonstrate using a sample in a moment how we do this. But some of the key ideas are that we begin by taking whatever Smart Plus goal we have agreed upon. And remember, in your meeting, it might not have been perfectly Smart Plus. So you might need to do a bit of work to make it Smart Plus, and that might need some collaboration from others on your team. But you're going to start by writing that goal in, and you'll see that the page works from left to right. So your goal goes in the furthest left column. And I have forgotten to tell you that at the beginning of the page, at the top of the page, you're going to put all of the particulars, such as who was at the meeting, who is this for, what date did the meeting occur, all that stuff gets put in there as well. After you've identified the goal, finally now you get to break it down into the specific steps that you'll take, all those actions that we talked about. And so that will be the column that is the next. And you'll see that the whole thing expands now as we break down in step-by-step order the actions that we'll need to take to accomplish the goal. Next, we'll identify the people who have accepted responsibility for those steps. Now, I have a couple of very important points to make here, and I want you to note them. The first is that it's not only staff who will accept responsibility for each step. In fact, if you go back to our underpinnings around PSR, what it means to do PSR, it's incredibly important for the supported individual to accept responsibility for some or all steps, at least partial responsibility or shared responsibility. And the same is true for other stakeholders, such as family members, friends, and other professionals. The second idea is that you would really only be able to put people down as being responsible for a step if they were there in some personal way at the meeting and said, I'll accept responsibility for that. I'll be the person or one of the people who makes that step happen. So you're going to identify a person responsible for each specific step, not just for the goal in general. And it should be people who are at the meeting, and it can and should include the supported person as well as other stakeholders. You'll also need to identify resources, and that's a pretty broad category of things. It can include money or a source of funding, equipment such as a vehicle or a wheelchair. It can include approval or authorization. You might need permission to do something. An example of that would be if you had to teach somebody how to take their own meds, you'd need that variance we talked about in medications. You'd need to have professional expertise, or you'd need the professionals with that expertise to be accessible to you. And so this is where you would put people like doctors and physical therapists. They're not people who are going to be under our responsibilities column. They're people who are waiting for you to phone them. They are out there in the community if the responsible person, if the facilitator makes it happen. So for example, if I have an individual who wants to get speech language pathology, but the community doesn't have a speech language pathologist, then this is going to be a resource that is, or an absence of a resource, that's an obstacle. Resources might exist in other ways though, such as being able to reach people electronically or get some type of media that they publish, such as a book or a video series. Community services, such as whether or not a person can take swimming lessons or whether or not transit reaches a particular part of the town. So you're going to identify all of the resources that are needed. And again, you're identifying them at specific steps, not just for the goal as a whole. And then finally, you're going to identify deadlines and or the schedule for each step. So deadlines are the dates by which a step must be completed, but sometimes something has it's done multiple times, such as, for example, going to swimming lessons every Tuesday and Thursday for a number of weeks, or going to the gym for 5 different half-hour sessions over a course of a number of months. So you'll see how I lay that out in a moment. Okay, so here's an example of a sheet. Now, of course, your sheet still has room up top for the names of all the individuals who attended, for the individual who's supported, and for the date and time of the meeting. This is missing all of that, but you can put it in on yours. So here we go. As I said, working from left until right, you can see that we have all of the columns that I identified in the slide, plus 2 more, and we'll talk about these 2 later. So first, I just simply have a number for my goal. This box hasn't got very much in it, but you should still do this. Next is the goal. This is a SMART Plus goal. It's expressed with an I statement, has all of the ingredients. It describes what a person will achieve at the end, and it has the end date by August 30th. It's positive. I can tell how many times a person will need to do something. In this case, it's 1 swimming badge. And I assume it addresses the person's want or need, which is that they want to swim. So this will be evidence that they have achieved a level of proficiency. So I've got my goal. This came out of my meeting. Everything else is getting done by me after the meeting. This is where my meeting essentially ended. I might have identified some responsible people by that point, but we'll talk about that later on. You'll notice that I have identified along the way steps that are in order. The first one I did is create a budget because I wanted to remember that money is going to be required here. The person is going to need to save for these lessons. And a lot of folks forget that step. It might be also important for you to incorporate things into a person's busy schedule or to arrange transportation. And I need to follow that budget. Many people would automatically start here. Oh, I'll sign up for the lessons, except then later on when somebody says, well, why didn't John get to go to his swimming lessons? You have to be able to say, well, he didn't have enough money. We should have thought about that and built it into our plan. Then we're going to go to the lessons, and you can see that here we've identified that this is going to be a repeating thing because it's weekly. And then we're going to check in with the teacher at the end. We'd, for example, have evidence at the end that the badge was actually there, and we would do review. Now, I'm going to emphasize something that's really incredibly important, and I can't believe how often people forget it. In every single case, your goals will have at least 2 steps. At least 2 steps. One will be the step it takes to accomplish the goal. And every single goal will have a last step of review. Remember, our ethic is to assess, address, and then reassess. That reassessment is called reviewing. So we will never have just one action. You will always finish with review. So you'll notice that word is here. Then I've identified who's responsible. Curtis is the name of my supported individual. Then I've identified who else might help. KW might be somebody else who is listed above here, and I apologize for the fact that I don't have that for you to look at. But you can see that I've identified whether it's a specific person with their initials or their name, or whether it's just the group of staff in a particular facility. Here I've said it's the Thursday evening staff we're going to take him to his lessons. And KW, who it turns out is, by the way, his key worker, that's what KW stands for, is going to be the person that helps do the budget, helps to sign him up, and goes and does the review. You can see that I've got a target date, and even though they don't line up, the numbers match up. April 15th is the date by which I'll have this budget done. April 15th to June 15th will be a savings time, right? Here's my following my budget. June 15th is the date I'm going to go in and sign up. The 3s align, all make sense together. From June 15th to August 30th, what are we doing? Well, that's number 4. We're going to lessons every Thursday night, and the staff are taking him. And then I'm going to do these checking in with the teachers on the 22nd, on the 15th, the August 15th, and at the very end. So you can see I've actually said, I'm not going to wait to the end to find out if Curtis's lessons are going well. I've also identified at each section what resources the person needs. For me to be able to set a budget, I need to know what amount of money is going in and out of his bank account. I need his bank statements, and I will probably want a computer to write this budget down. I'll need his bank card if I'm going to be able to save money and deposit it. For the third one, I need to make sure that we go and actually bring the money, and we'll have to sign up online. That's why I have a computer. Number 4, we need a way of getting to his lessons. There's his transportation. He also, of course, needs a swimsuit and towel. He needs his goggles. Maybe he has a medical alert condition. He needs to take his bracelet. Now, what if I didn't already have these things? Then I would have to create a step over here to arrange them. For example, if he didn't have a bus pass, that would be one of my steps. And what do I need to do this review? Well, I need to be able to access that instructor. Maybe I need contact information or to speak to them afterwards, and the written record. That will almost entirely finish what we need to write for that particular goal. Then we'll draw a line underneath. What's left are these 2 other categories, and they couldn't be easier. This is really important for your instructions, because if you don't listen, you'll end up doing unnecessary work. We're asked whether or not we're going to measure this goal. Well, let's keep it simple. The answer will always be yes. If you're a graduate of the Riverside College course, you've learned how to do SMART Plus goals, because that allows you to measure that goal. And so I want you to always make your goals in a measurable form, and therefore you'll always know that you're being productive or whether you're not being productive. So just write yes and you're done. Why does this column blank? Well, because when we've finished with this report, we're going to send it out to people, and they're going to say, yes, it looks good, it doesn't look good, shouldn't have called it a report, this plan. Okay, we agree to it. Now it's in action. And as we go along throughout the year, people literally come along and say, okay, great, we did this, sign it here, and initial that it happened on this date. It'll be handwriting, and the same thing at this one, the same thing at this one, so that by the time we're done, we'll have a bunch of notes here that show that something actually was done as we go through it. So it's blank for now. Here's another one. Let's say that the goal for Curtis was he will have a pair of orthopedic shoes by September 30th of that year. 2012 seems like it would be a time machine, but we'll pretend we're in 2012. What are the steps? Well, we're going to call his general practitioner, his family doctor, and get a referral, because you need that before you can go further. We'll make an appointment with the podiatrist. We'll go to that podiatrist and get the prescription for these orthopedic shoes. We'll visit the shoe store, a special shoe store, and get a quote and find out what his shoes will cost. We'll also pick out the style. We'll submit that quote to SW. SW stands for social worker. The social worker is going to be our source of funding, and the funding is going to be sought by somebody. When we get that funding, we're going to buy the shoes, and we're going to find out whether they actually work for Curtis. We're going to go back and see the podiatrist and see whether or not Curtis's shoes are working the way he should. So again, we always finish with the step called review. Always, always, always. Who's responsible? You can see that Curtis and his key worker are responsible for some steps. Step number 5, the supervisor agreed to do. And step number 6, which was getting the funding, had nobody from the home. It was the social worker that was doing this. Look who's going to buy the shoes. It's not even a staff person. Curtis and his mom are going to go and share that moment together. And later on, Curtis and his key worker will go to the podiatrist to check the fit. There's the dates for each of our items. And unlike swimming lessons, they don't need a date range because they aren't recurring events. And what resources do we need? Well, we literally need a phone to be able to talk to a doctor, and we need to have the contact information from that doctor. We need to have the information from the doctor in terms of who we are going to go for the referral of the podiatrist. And we need a podiatrist. If we don't have one in our community, it's going to slow us down or be a barrier. And you can see that we go all the way down here. I'm going to scooch down to this one. The funding source is a place that we can send that quote in that application. If we don't have a funding source, what happens if tomorrow the government of BC says we're no longer going to fund orthopedic shoes? Well, we'll later on have to tell people that we couldn't achieve our goal, or that we had to change the way we achieved our goal. Look at this. It doesn't say here that Curtis will apply for shoe funding or anything like that. It says he'll have orthopedic shoes. And so if it turned out that our funding source went out the window, that, for example, the government stopped funding these, but then Curtis's rich uncle said, I will give you a funding, I'll be your funding source, then off we go. We continue to make progress. So we'll be able to demonstrate what we might have had as an obstacle. That might explain why we didn't reach a goal or were delayed in reaching a goal. And this is part of that accountability I talked about. We don't achieve every goal. Sometimes things happen. Maybe Curtis had a tragic accident and orthopedic shoes became less of a priority for him because he was fighting some other medical battle. Or maybe Curtis inherited a bunch of money and we no longer needed to make an application for money anymore. But you can see that we've listed all of the resources per step. You will do this for all of your goals. Again, I'd like to see at least 3, and if you give me 5, you're going to be in pretty good shape. 5 is a bonus amount. I'd love to see 5. Again, we're simply saying yes, and we're leaving this last column blank. Pretty easy peasy. You'll notice that this form is typed, and it should be typed when you submit it. This section in real life gets eventually messy with handwriting, as I said, but that never happens in the assignment. Okay, so this is how you'll fill out that ISP form. Once you fill it out, what do you do with it? Okay, we have filled out our form, and now it's time for us to follow up. It's important that we do this business of completing the form promptly after the meeting. I think it's terrible practice and very unprofessional to make people wait for a long time. And I can tell you without a word of exaggeration that I've walked into a person's ISP meeting and had the social worker hand me the ISP from the previous year, not as an extra copy, but for the very first time. So I have seen this document for 5 minutes, which literally means there was no way for anybody to execute the plan. So in fact, we want to get these out to people within a week or 2 afterwards, and we want to be able to tell people at the end of the meeting that that's our plan and our timeline. We're going to have on it the word draft initially so that people can give us their feedback. Typically, families aren't going to have a lot of feedback unless there's something that's a big concern, but other professionals may say, well, I don't remember saying I would do that, or it turns out that this resource isn't available anymore. So we want to give people a chance to give us some revisions to that document before we consider it final. We are going to, once we have that final document, make sure that we orient everybody who is going to have a role in executing it. Something as simple as going through it at a staff meeting or training people on any specific provisions within it will be important. We're going to acquire the needed resources. If that's a bus pass or a bank card or a library card, we're going to go out and get those things. But sometimes we are developing the resources. So if we have to develop a task analysis or develop a reinforcement strategy, then we might do that within our own team. And remember, resources can include access to medical professionals. So acquiring an appointment might sound like a weird way to put it, but going out and getting those resources arranged is what we mean here. Every single day, we're going to try and use this plan as a way to guide our practice. And we will make decisions about what we schedule and how we do things so that we are gradually working toward completing our goals. And it doesn't mean those are the only things we'll do. If somebody gives you free tickets to go and see a concert, you shouldn't say, no, we're not going to that concert because it doesn't fit our goals. We'll have lots of stuff that we do that's enriching our quality of life, but we don't want to fill our days with a bunch of things that ignore our goals. So our programming should be built around the ISP. We want to make sure that we're constantly in contact with the other people who have been stakeholders, especially if they have accepted a role as a responsible person, making sure that they're actually on track. And this becomes particularly important with people who are non-professionals because they don't have an ethical responsibility. They have a moral choice as to whether or not they fulfill it. Sometimes they get distracted or feel overwhelmed or things happen in their lives. So checking in with people, helping them to feel comfortable attacking the areas that they said they would do, providing extra supports, or working through problems if they have any, are valuable things to do. And if somebody's just not doing their part and you know it's going to keep everybody else from being able to reach the goal, then you might start to suggest some alternatives. You're going to, every single day, keep daily notes in the form of tracking notes or daily logs, and you should always record those notes with the ISP in mind. You should be able to demonstrate how the work you did helped the person get closer to their goals. Or if they had a bad day and they backslid, they regressed, then we should talk about that in the context of their goals. And the same is true when we get ready to do our quarterly progress reports. Again, we put our goals in there and talk about what we did to help get closer to them. Any goals that are completed, as I showed you in the sample document, you're going to be noting steps as you go along the way. And when you finally reach the goal, you're going to note that, and that's going to be a moment of pride, and you're going to be able to show that to people at the subsequent ISP meeting or identify that you've met a goal in a person's progress report. And remember that you may have to adjust, as we said, when changes occur. So it's not the end of the world if you have to extend a date or change the order of steps or get a different resource involved. Obstacles happen all of the time, as we all know, and your job as a professional is to try and find another way. So don't get locked into the how you do things. As long as you're moving towards completing the goal, and of course you're doing it in a way that's ethical, you'll be in good shape. It is, however, a really important thing to document the obstacles that you're experiencing and the remedies that you're trying, so that if a year from now people have questions for you about why a goal wasn't achieved, you'll be able to say, here's what happened and here's what we did about it. And remember, you need to do it so that other people will be able to understand it, because if you leave before the next ISP meeting, they'll still be responsible for being able to tell the story. And you're going to file that ISP in that big, thick file that we talked about. As well, you'll keep a copy in the person's binder so it's easily accessible, and people will be able to quickly consult it and make it part of their living day-to-day work. I always say to people, ISPs or IEPs are not meant to sit on people's shelves gathering dust or to become coffee coasters. You should be looking at them frequently and being open to talking with people like families or other professionals who ask you about it. So you should be able to quickly be able to tell people how you're doing. So you're going to have this file of planning documentation that gets stored in a file cabinet, so that if somebody says, prove that you did it in an inclusive way, you'll be able to do that. But you also want to have that ISP document ready at hand to show other people, to orient new staff, and to check on yourself. All right, that's the end of our slideshow and the end of the 3 steps or 3 processes for this module. I'm going to do one more video about the power of metaphors, and it'll be a brief one, and it'll fit in as an overlay to all of this.